We've spent some time here on Wrestling Bios looking over some of the most legendary and well-known tag teams in wrestling, from the Legion of Doom, Demolition, the Rockers, all the way to the Steiners and Harlem Heat. In pro wrestling, not all tag teams gain legendary status, and as time has gone on and tag wrestling within the WWE has gotten less focus, it's even more difficult for a tag team to stand out today. Still, this doesn't mean a tag team can't leave their own mark on the company. Charles Warrington and Glenn Ruth done all they could to leave their mark in the WWF during the years of late 96 all the way to 2000. During this transitional period in the World Wrestling Federation, one would think that their gimmick, the Headbangers, would have fit in really well to the company's upcoming Attitude Era. However, this really wasn't the case. Let's take a look at the careers of Mosh and Thrasher, the Headbangers, and see if we can put the pieces together to figure out exactly why the team didn't gain main event status. Glenn Ruth, the man who would go on to become Thrasher, was the first to receive wrestling training. Glenn attended the Larry Sharpe Munster Factory, one of the more prolific wrestling schools at the time, and a school that seems to constantly get brought up in these videos. As a little side note, while Glenn was at the Munster Factory, he said he was responsible for showing the Big Show the ropes, learning Paul White how to take bumps and apply basic holds. Charles Warrington had attended a show in New Jersey that had Glenn on the card. Charles and Glenn had known each other from school, and after the show, Glenn suggested that Charles attended Larry Sharpe's wrestling school to become a professional wrestler. Glenn became a standout at the Munster Factory, and very soon he got some bookings in Japan. Back in the States, both Glenn and Charles had some matches with the WWE during 1993. Working as an enhancement guy, Glenn was on the second episode of Monday Night Raw, facing off against Marty Jannetty. Glenn also had a televised match against Shawn Michaels in mid-1993. Charles, meanwhile, had a televised match with Papa Shango, where he worked under the name Chaz Ware. In 1994, Glenn and Charles first teamed up to create the Spiders tag team. The Spiders started in their home state of New Jersey, but before moving to Smoky Mountain Wrestling, they also worked in the Dallas area, the USWA, and they even had a match on Eastern Championship Wrestling against Ian and Axel Rotten. It was in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, though, that everything changed for the Spiders. Jim Cornette, one of the founders of Smoky Mountain and head booker, was fond of Glenn and Charles, but he didn't like the Spiders gimmick, mainly due to the pair wrestling under masks. Glenn said, "Cornette went to a heavy metal concert and saw all these shaved heads and tattoos and piercings. These guys were stage diving and spitting on each other. I've been in that atmosphere, so I knew exactly what he was talking about." So let's get the image of Jim Cornette at a metal concert out of our heads as we continue on. Jim Cornette suggested that the Spiders became the Headbangers, giving the guys new names, Mosh and Thrasher. Glenn suggested that his name, Slasher, was changed to Thrasher due to Slasher sounding like the Guns N' Roses guitarist Slash, and with that, the Headbangers were born. Charles apparently was responsible for the duo wearing skirts, as according to him, the Headbangers initially wasn't catching on in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, but when the skirts came on, they got a fair amount of heat. The Headbangers stayed in Smoky Mountain until the doors closed, and thanks to Jim Cornette, Mosh and Thrasher were able to find work as a tag team in the WWF. Glenn, who we will now refer to as Thrasher, said, "We worked for Cornette until Smoky Mountain closed. Cornette was still up with the WWF and he said to us that he was going to try to get everybody hired up there, so we went up there and tried out for a potential part-time position. It was actually Shane McMahon who loved us. We didn't change anything and pretty much got hired right there at a TV taping with part-time contracts. And back then, those part-time contracts were sweet." Mosh and Thrasher were immediately sent to the USWA to get ready for their WWF tag run. Mosh and Thrasher briefly worked as the Headbangers before becoming the Flying Nuns and the Sisters of Love, being managed by Brother Love Bruce Pritchard. They became mainstays on early Shotgun Saturday Night episodes, setting the tone for what was initially to be a grittier WWF TV show. The Headbangers' first sniff at a pay-per-view was working the In Your House Final Four Dark match against the Godwins in February of '97, and from here the team would find themselves working on Monday Night Raw in the weeks that followed. On the 7th of February 1997 edition of Raw, the Headbangers defeated the Hardy Boys. 1 week later, the Headbangers versus the Legion of Doom went to a double countout. The Headbangers had gotten a good crowd reaction, and it seemed the Office were happy with their first few months within the WWF. The team managed to make their way to WrestleMania 13, where they competed in a 4-way elimination tag match that also included the New Blackjacks, the Godwins, and Doug Furnas and Phil LaFawn. Not only were they included in WrestleMania here, but they won this match. Mosh and Thrasher got a good reaction here from the Chicago crowd as they picked up the victory. The win at WrestleMania earned the Headbangers a tag title shot the following night on Raw against Owen Hart and Davey Boy Smith, and while they did defeat Owen and Davey, it was via DQ. The feud wouldn't continue as Owen and Bulldog joined Brett in forming the Hart Foundation, and the Headbangers were not involved in that particular storyline. In the weeks that followed, Mosh and Thrasher would work against the likes of the Smoking Guns, Furnas and LaFawn, and the Godwins. The factions of the WWF were getting more and more exposure during this time period, and when the Nation broke up and created spin-off groups like Los Boricuas and the DOA, it only made things more difficult for the older tag teams to get some TV time. This era of tag wrestling in the WWF is not really that well recognised nor received. Quote Mosh, "Probably the biggest reason why is there wasn't a lot of established tag teams. They put a lot of guys together like Dude Love and Stone Cold and made them tag champs to help build their angle. They took two guys as great as Road Dogg and Billy Gunn were and put them together and let them run. They put the likes of the Boricuas together and were just taking guys and just kind of throwing them together. I think that kind of hurt it because in the 80s you had the Midnight Express, Rock and Roll Express, the Andersons, and all these great tag teams that were established for so long. It meant a lot more." That being said, the Headbangers must have been doing something right, as at In Your House Ground Zero, Mosh and Thrasher defeated Owen and Davey, the Godwins and the Legion of Doom to win the WWF tag titles in another 4-way elimination match. It was quite a shocking win. I don't think anyone thought the Headbangers would come out of this as the winners. A month later though, at In Your House Bad Blood, the Headbangers dropped the titles to the Godwins. The Headbangers wouldn't win the titles again as they feuded with Los Boricuas and the New Age Outlaws to end the year. Their TV time was also becoming more limited, but they were a mainstay on the house show circuit. At the beginning of 1998, the Headbangers defeated the Rock and Roll Express to capture the NWA Tag Team titles. Jim Cornette was bringing the NWA into the WWF to show Vince McMahon what real wrestlers were all about. So yeah, due to the way the Headbangers were being perceived and presented to WWF audiences, the Headbangers winning the NWA tag titles was supposed to come across as a more tongue-in-cheek fuck you to the NWA. Jerry Lawler portrayed this best when he said on commentary that the prestigious NWA tag titles are being held by two goofs wearing skirts. The whole NWA and the WWF is something I want to cover in the future. It is interesting to look back on, and Jim Cornette cut some excellent promos during this time period too. The Headbangers dropped the NWA tag titles to the Midnight Express, Bodacious Bart and Bombastic Bob on the 30th of March edition of Raw in '98, and from here the Headbangers would be lucky to get featured on TV. They did work house shows frequently and had appearances on Shotgun Saturday Night, which by this point was a very different show to what it was initially. By the end of '98, the Headbangers were jobbing in squash matches to the likes of the Oddities and Southern Justice. After Thrasher suffered a knee injury in May of '99, Mosh was renamed Beaver Cleavage. After a questionable and, to put it bluntly, shit storyline featuring Beaver and his girlfriend, Thrasher came back and the Headbangers were reformed later in the year. The Headbangers would then begin dressing up like their opponents and eventually they turned heel. During this heel run, they would dress totally in drag. After the Headbangers split for the second time and Mosh went on to team with D'Lo Brown, Thrasher continued to wrestle in singles competition, mainly on WWF shows, before being sent to the WWF's Power Pro Wrestling Development Territory in Memphis. He was released from the WWF in December of 2000. Mosh had his final WWF match on the July 30th, 2001 edition of Raw is War in a dark match, defeating the Inferno Kid. The Headbangers went on to work in Ring of Honor briefly and also found work in Juggalo Championship Wrestling. They travelled across America competing in many indie promotions, and in 2016 they even made a return to the WWE during a SmackDown Tag Team Championship tournament. They lost to Heath Slater and Rhino in a first round match. From here, the Headbangers made 2 further SmackDown appearances, losing to the Usos in a Survivor Series qualifying match and making an appearance on the 900th episode of SmackDown. Today, the Headbangers have shown a desire to work with the young talent in NXT. Mosh said, "I had emailed Hunter about possibly doing some NXT stuff, and he said that door is possibly open for down the road. I think Glenn and I can contribute in the ring, and I think we have shown that, but at the same time we have a lot of knowledge we can pass on to some of the younger talent as well." So to wrap things up, it seemed more like the Headbangers were victims of poor timing. While 1997 was a great time period in the WWF, it seemed that new and young tag teams just didn't fare too well. Furnace and LaFawn are another example here. Even though they debuted in '96, they were an incredible tag team that the WWF just wasn't sure what to do with. Had Mosh and Thrasher maybe debuted later in the Attitude Era, then maybe they could have made a bigger splash with more impact. As it turned out, by the time the Attitude Era was in full swing, the Headbangers were already low on the cards. The knee injury suffered by Thrasher didn't help things either. The Headbangers dropped the NWA tag titles to the Midnight Express, Bodacious Bart and Bombastic Bob, on the March 30th. Bodacious Bart and Bombastic. Fucking hell.